One late-night phone call changed everything for a woman nobody noticed. Stay tuned till the end, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories. Darlene Whitaker's life had been made up of long days and even longer nights. At 58 years old, she had lived through more struggles than most people cared to imagine, though she rarely spoke of them aloud. Born and raised in Toledo, Ohio, she had grown up in a neighborhood where survival wasn't guaranteed, but endurance was taught like a second language. Her father's back had given out after years at the Jeep plant. Her mother had earned meager pay watching other people's children. There was never much money in the Whitaker household, but there was grit, and grit carried Darlene farther than anything else ever could. By the time she turned 16, she knew college wasn't an option. Tuition was out of reach, and there was no safety net waiting to catch her. So she worked, first in diners with greasy aprons and endless pots of coffee, then in laundromats that smelled of bleach, later in grocery stores where she bagged items for families who never glanced her way. Jobs came and went, but responsibility never did. Soon enough, there were children, 3 of them, each with their own dreams and difficulties. Their father proved unreliable, disappearing for weeks at a time, leaving Darlene to juggle bills, homework, doctor's visits, and night shifts. She learned quickly that no one was coming to rescue her. If she wanted her kids to have a meal on the table, she had to find a way to put it there. Cleaning offices became her constant. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. Steady meant rent was paid, lights stayed on, and no one went to bed hungry. For more than 2 decades, she scrubbed, dusted, mopped, and emptied trash bins for companies that barely noticed she existed. 7 years ago, she landed the night shift at Hawthorne Global in downtown Detroit. The company was a symbol of wealth and ambition, its glass towers glittering over the Detroit River like monuments to power. For the executives, stepping inside was a mark of prestige. For Darlene, it was just where she punched the clock. Each night she arrived before sunset, rode the elevator past floors buzzing with late meetings, and stepped onto the 23rd floor where silence soon swallowed everything. The CEO's suite and executive offices were her territory. She learned the rhythm, vacuum the hallways, wipe the glass doors, polish the desk surfaces, replace the liners and trash cans. She moved like clockwork. No one looked twice at the woman pushing a cart of cleaning supplies. That invisibility stung sometimes, but it also protected her. In a world where executives played with billions, she didn't want attention. Attention could mean trouble. And yet, invisibility had its cost. Years of working in the shadows left her wondering if anyone in the building even knew her name. To most, she was just the cleaning lady. Faces blurred past her in elevators. Executives carried on conversations as though she wasn't even present. It wasn't exactly cruel. It was worse. It was indifference. Darlene had learned to live with it, though sometimes loneliness pressed heavy on the bus rides home to her small apartment on Monroe Street. She told herself she preferred it. "Better lonely than helpless," she whispered when silence settled too hard. But even shadows see things. Darlene noticed the tension in young assistants when Alexander Hawthorne himself walked by. She heard voices through half-closed doors, contracts, projections, deadlines. She didn't understand every word, but the patterns stuck. Words like exclusivity, partnership, and deadlines carved themselves into her memory, even if she couldn't quote the fine print. Night after night, she pieced together fragments like a puzzle that belonged to a world she could never touch. That evening started like so many others. The city outside glowed against the black surface of the river. The building had emptied hours ago, leaving the air unnaturally still. The wheels of her cart squeaked as she pushed it across the pristine carpet. She collected coffee cups abandoned by executives too important to carry them to the sink. She straightened chairs, wiped fingerprints from glass tables, dusted shelves lined with books that looked more decorative than read. Her knees ached. Her hands were roughened from years of bleach, but her pace never faltered. She paused by the massive windows of the CEO's office, her reflection staring back at her in the glass. Behind her reflection, the skyline sparkled like scattered diamonds. She often wondered what it must feel like to sit at that desk instead of cleaning it. What power must it give someone, what confidence to know decisions you made could ripple across continents? It was a thought she always pushed away quickly. That wasn't her world. Her world was mops and rags and steady paychecks. But that night, the silence broke. The phone rang, not just a soft buzz or a single missed call. It rang loud, sharp against the quiet. Once, twice, then again. The sound echoed across the office, filling the space like an alarm. Darlene froze. Her eyes shifted toward the desk where the screen glowed. A number flashed across it, long and unfamiliar, a string of digits that meant nothing to her. She frowned, clutching the rag in her hand tighter. Calls after midnight weren't her concern. She wasn't supposed to touch anything personal. Cleaning staff who meddled lost their jobs. She had seen it happen before. And yet, the ringing continued. Her chest tightened. She told herself to keep moving, to push her cart out into the hallway, to ignore it. But curiosity rooted her in place. The sound seemed to grow louder with each ring, as if demanding she answer. She whispered under her breath, "Don't be stupid, Darlene." Her hand hovered over the receiver, then pulled back. She turned toward the door, ready to leave it behind. But the phone blared again, insistent. Whoever was calling wasn't giving up. The clock on the wall ticked toward midnight. The entire building was asleep, except for her. The security guard downstairs would never know what to do with a call like this. If no one picked up, whoever was on the other end might assume the company didn't care. Was that her problem? Number. But the ringing gnawed at her all the same. She wheeled her cart closer, each squeak of the wheels a reminder she was crossing a line. The papers on the desk caught her eye. Contracts with highlighted passages, dense language she couldn't fully decipher. A glass of water sat half full, abandoned. Someone important had clearly been there hours earlier. The phone rang again. Her hand trembled as she reached toward it, then pulled away. She closed her eyes and drew a breath. Life had never given her much room to hesitate. And sometimes hesitation cost more than action. The sound dared her. She let out a quiet sigh. Her fingers curled around the receiver. At that moment, standing alone in a skyscraper high above Detroit, Darlene Whitaker was no longer just a cleaning lady polishing the invisible traces of other people's lives. She was a woman about to step into a choice that would shake the walls of one of the most powerful companies in America. And, though she didn't know it yet, that simple act, the decision to lift the phone, would change not just her night, but her future. The receiver felt heavy in Darlene Whitaker's hand, heavier than she expected. The moment she pressed it to her ear, there was a sharp inhale on the other end, followed by a man's voice. His accent was thick, European, German, maybe, and his words were clipped with urgency. Finally, someone answers. "Is this Hawthorne Global? This is Stephen Klein from Munich. I have been calling for hours. Where is Alexander?" Darlene froze. Her throat tightened. Her mind screamed at her to hang up. She wasn't supposed to be here. Not in this conversation. Not in this world. She was supposed to be scrubbing trash bins and wiping fingerprints from glass. But the panic in his voice rooted her to the spot. I'm sorry," she stammered. "Mr. Hawthorne isn't here." This is the night staff." There was a frustrated groan on the line. "Listen carefully. We have a serious problem. The contract. Someone changed the language. If it is not corrected tonight, by morning I will pull out. Do you understand? Billions are at stake." The words slammed into her. Billions. Contracts pulling out. She nearly dropped the phone. What business did she have standing in the middle of a billion-dollar crisis? She should have told him he had the wrong person and hung up. She should have. But she didn't. Her fingers clutched the receiver tighter. "Sir, I don't think I'm the person you want to be speaking with." "I don't care who you are," Klein snapped, his frustration vibrating through the line. "You work there." "Then you tell Hawthorne this deal is dead at sunrise unless someone explains why the exclusivity clause was changed." Her gaze flicked to the desk. Papers lay scattered across it, highlighted lines catching her eye. She remembered wiping around them earlier in the evening. Now, with the phone cradled between her ear and shoulder, she leaned closer. The legal language blurred together, too dense for her to truly understand. But one word stood out: exclusivity. She had heard that word before. Just last week, two executives had argued about it in the elevator. One had muttered angrily, "Clients hate exclusivity. It locks them down too tight." The other had said, "Push it through anyway. They'll swallow it." Her stomach clenched. Was this what Klein was talking about? "Mr. Klein," she said slowly, hesitating over every syllable, I might see what you mean. This part here, about exclusivity, it doesn't look like it was in the original." There was silence on the line, and then his voice came back, sharper but calmer. "Yes, exactly. The original agreement did not have this. Someone added it. If it remains, my board will refuse. This deal cannot stand." Darlene's heart pounded. She glanced toward the doorway, half expecting someone to walk in and catch her with the phone pressed to her ear. She could lose her job for this, no question. But she couldn't bring herself to hang up. I can't fix this for you," she admitted, "but I can promise you this. I'll make sure your message gets to the right person." "Please, just hold on until morning." "No," Klein snapped. "A message is not enough. Tell me, do they intend to cheat us? Did they change this clause on purpose?" The question rattled her. She remembered the overheard argument in the hallway, the greed in those words, "push it through anyway." She didn't know the full picture, but she knew enough. "I don't think they're trying to cheat you," she said cautiously. "But maybe someone got greedy. Maybe they thought you wouldn't notice." Klein's frustration turned into a low growl. "This is what I feared. They treat us like children. They believe we don't read fine print." Darlene steadied her voice. "Look, I can't speak for them. But I can tell you this, Mr. Hawthorne doesn't like losing good clients. He'll want to fix this. You've got to give him that chance." For a long moment, the line was silent. Then Klein's exhale crackled through the receiver. "Why should I trust you? You are not a lawyer. You are not an executive. You clean floors." The words stung more than she wanted to admit. She had spent her whole life hearing variations of the same thing, that her role meant she didn't matter, that her voice didn't count. She straightened her back, pressing the receiver tighter to her ear. "You're right," she said, quietly but firmly. "I do clean floors. But right now, I'm the only one who picked up this phone. If you walk away tonight, nobody will know why until it's too late. If you wait until morning, at least Hawthorne can respond. Don't throw it away before he even has a chance." There was another silence, heavy and tense. Darlene's hand shook as she waited for him to hang up, certain she'd pushed too far. Instead, Klein's voice returned, softer this time. You speak with more sense than half the executives I deal with. Fine, I will wait, but no longer than sunrise. Tell him the exclusivity clause is unacceptable. If it remains, we walk. Darlene let out a shaky breath. I'll tell him. I promise. Do not break this promise, Whitaker, he warned. I risk everything on your word. Her throat tightened. I understand. You'll have your answer in the morning. The line went dead. Darlene lowered the receiver slowly, her hand trembling so hard she nearly dropped it. She stared at the silent phone, the glowing screen now dark, and tried to steady her breathing. She had just spoken to one of the most powerful men in the company's orbit. She had convinced him to wait, if only for a few hours. She sank into the CEO's leather chair, the kind she had never dared to touch before. Her knees felt weak. Her mind raced with panic. What if Hawthorne didn't believe her? What if he fired her for even picking up the phone? But beneath the fear, something else stirred. Pride. For the first time in years, she had been more than invisible. She had mattered. The office was silent again, except for the sound of her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. She forced herself to stand, to finish her rounds, though every step felt heavier than usual. She told herself not to think about it. Morning would come soon enough, and with it, the moment of truth. The first rays of dawn slipped between the blinds of the 23rd floor, casting long lines of pale light across the polished surfaces of Alexander Hawthorne's office. Darlene Whitaker stood by the window, clutching a rag in her hand she had forgotten to use. She should have left hours ago, caught the bus back to Monroe Street, made herself a cup of coffee before collapsing into bed. That was her usual routine. But this morning wasn't like the others. Sleep was impossible. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard Stephen Klein's voice in her ear again. Billions are at stake. Do not break your promise, Whitaker. The words had kept her pacing the halls long after her shift should have ended. She'd checked the phone twice to make sure the call hadn't been a dream. It hadn't. The phone still sat there, silent now, but its weight lingered in the air. At exactly 7 a.m., the elevator doors slid open. Darlene's breath caught in her throat. Alexander Hawthorne entered, flanked by his assistant, a young man in a sharp suit with a tablet tucked under his arm. Hawthorne was tall, broad-shouldered, his salt and pepper hair perfectly groomed, his suit pressed so clean it seemed to deflect the morning light. He walked with the kind of confidence that came from decades of power, the kind that made entire rooms fall silent when he entered. Darlene shrank back instinctively. She wasn't supposed to be here, not anymore. The cleaning crew cleared out before executives arrived, but her feet refused to move. Hawthorne stepped into his office, his stride purposeful, until he froze. His eyes fell on the desk. The phone was off the hook, resting crookedly on its cradle. The assistant frowned, immediately flipping open the folder in his hands. Hawthorne's gaze shifted, sharp and piercing, until it landed on her. "Who are you?" His voice was calm, but carried an edge that made her stomach clench. She swallowed hard, forcing her voice past the lump in her throat. I'm Darlene. Night staff. Cleaning crew." His assistant blinked at her in confusion, then looked back at Hawthorne. "Why are you still on this floor?" Hawthorne demanded, his tone lower now, heavier. Her palms were slick with sweat. The rag in her hand felt like the only anchor keeping her steady. "Sir, last night," she faltered, then pressed forward. The phone kept ringing. A client from Germany, Stephen Klein. He said the contract had been changed. Something about exclusivity. He was ready to walk away. I told him to wait until you came in this morning." The words tumbled out fast, almost too fast. As soon as they left her mouth, dread closed in. She had admitted everything. Answering his phone, speaking with a client, meddling in business that was far above her station. The assistant's brow furrowed. Exclusivity clause? He flipped rapidly through the documents in his folder, eyes scanning line after line. His expression darkened. That wasn't in the draft I reviewed. Hawthorne's jaw tightened. He turned slowly back to Darlene, his face unreadable. You answered my phone? Yes, sir. Her voice was barely more than a whisper. I know I had no right, but if I hadn't, Mr. Klein would have pulled the deal. I couldn't just ignore it. The room went very still. Darlene's heart hammered so loudly she swore they must hear it. She braced herself for the inevitable, for Hawthorne to call security, strip her of her badge, and have her escorted out. She had broken an unspoken law. People like her weren't supposed to exist in conversations that shaped billion-dollar futures. But before Hawthorne spoke, his assistant interrupted, urgency in his tone. She's right. Someone slipped the exclusivity clause in last minute. If Klein saw it, he'd have every reason to walk. Hawthorne's expression darkened, the weight of anger settling across his features. He strode to the window, staring out at the skyline for a long, tense moment. Then he turned sharply. Get Klein on the line. Now. The assistant rushed to the phone, dialing quickly. The line clicked, and almost immediately, Klein's voice erupted through the speaker. Hawthorne, at last. Do you have any idea what kind of night I've had? Hawthorne raised a hand, his tone calm but commanding. Mr. Klein, first let me thank you for your patience. I heard about the issue. You heard? Klein barked. From who? Hawthorne's eyes flicked toward Darlene. She stood frozen, her chest tight, afraid to breathe. From someone I should have been paying attention to a long time ago, Hawthorne said evenly. Her heart skipped. For a moment, she thought she'd misheard. Hawthorne continued, his voice firm. The clause should never have been included. I will have it removed immediately. The deal stands exactly as we agreed. There was a pause on the other end, then the sound of Klein's exhale, relief mingled with lingering irritation. Good. Then we continue. But next time, Hawthorne, I expect more respect. Understood, Hawthorne replied. You have my word. The line went dead. Silence filled the office again, heavy and electric. The assistant exhaled, already pulling out his phone to call the legal team. I'll have them correct it right away. He slipped out of the room, the door closing behind him, leaving only Hawthorne and Darlene. Hawthorne turned, his eyes fixed on her. His voice softened, but it carried weight. You saved this company from disaster, Miss Whitaker. Do you realize that? Her lips parted, but no sound came. She stared at him, stunned, her rags still clutched in her hand. He stepped closer, his gaze unyielding. Most people here wouldn't have had the guts to do what you did last night. You answered when no one else would, and because of that, our biggest client is still with us. Her chest tightened. For years, she had walked these halls like a shadow. Now, for the first time, she wasn't invisible. Hawthorne's eyes were locked on hers, and she felt seen, truly seen, in a way she hadn't in decades. Still, fear tangled with the pride rising in her chest. I just answered a phone. That's all. Hawthorne shook his head. No. You calmed a man who doesn't forgive mistakes. You gave him a reason to wait when no one else could have. That's not just anything. She gripped the rag tighter, unsure what to say. The weight of the night pressed against her, but underneath it, something fragile and powerful stirred. Recognition. Whatever came next, she knew this moment had changed everything. For a long heartbeat after the call with Stephen Klein ended, the office felt unnaturally quiet, like the building itself was holding its breath. Darlene Whitaker stood there with the rag still in her hand, the fabric damp and crumpled, as if it were the last thread tying her to the life she knew. Alexander Hawthorne didn't look away from her. The man who could reroute strategy with a sentence, who could summon a dozen vice presidents with a single calendar invite, was studying the night cleaner who had answered his phone. "Sit," he said softly, gesturing to the small visitor's chair in front of his desk. Darlene glanced at it as if it were a trick. In 7 years on this floor, she had circled that chair with a vacuum and a dust wand, but she had never put weight on its cushion. She perched on the edge, knees together, hands folded over the rag to keep them from shaking. Hawthorne took the seat opposite her, the seat kings reserved for their equals, and for a second she didn't know what to do with her eyes. He drew a measured breath. "Miss Whitaker, I owe you 2 things this morning. An apology and my respect." He let the words hang, not rushed, not performative. "I've walked past you for years and never once asked your name. That ends today." Something pricked behind her eyes. She swallowed it down. "You don't have to." "I do," he said, and the firmness in his tone cut off any reflex to excuse or minimize. "You kept a client from walking because you were willing to do something no one else did. You listened. You answered. You spoke with common sense when others were busy being clever." His mouth tightened, not at her, but at the truth of what had just played out. That took judgment and guts. Darlene shifted, the unfamiliarity of attention making her want to disappear into the fabric of the chair. "All I did was pick up a phone, sir." A small, wry smile touched his mouth. If that were all, anyone would have done it. He leaned back, studying her the way he had studied market charts and acquisition decks, not like an object but like a source, like someone whose mind had stored data he didn't know he needed. "You've been on this floor, what, every night?" "Most nights," she said, "for 7 years. And in 7 years, you've heard more than you've said." He nodded to himself, as if confirming a theory. "You pick up patterns that people in my chair miss because too many doors open for us. You notice the friction points, the way people talk when they think no one important is listening." He didn't dress it up. He didn't say, "when they think no one is around." He said, "no one important." And the accuracy stung in a way that also felt like balm. It mattered to hear the truth spoken plainly in a room where truth often came lacquered in strategy. Hawthorne stood, paced once to the window, then back, as if aligning his next move with the skyline itself. "I'm convening a session with my leadership team this week. Not a performance, not a town hall, a working session." He stopped, met her eyes. "I want you there." Darlene blinked, certain she'd misheard. "Me?" "You," he said, as simply as if inviting her were the most obvious solution in the world. "No slides, no speeches. I want my people to hear what the building sounds like at midnight, what it looks like from your vantage point, the things we miss because our calendars don't force us to see them." "I don't—" She forced a breath to settle her voice. "I'm not used to talking in rooms like that." "You are used to telling the truth," he said. "That's the harder habit. The rest we can navigate." He didn't move to his keyboard, didn't summon an assistant to schedule the meeting. He kept the moment human and close. "If you say yes, I'll make sure the room understands why you're there. Not as a token, as a witness, as the person who saved us from losing a partner because we stopped listening." The words "saved us" slid through the air and landed somewhere Darlene didn't let many things land. A place that had hardened from years of being overlooked and had learned to take pride in invisibility rather than risk disappointment. She felt that place soften a fraction. "What would you want me to say?" she asked. "Exactly what you said to Klein," he answered. "That people don't like feeling ignored. That we get into trouble when we assume we're the only smart ones in the conversation. That exclusivity, for all its leverage, feels like a trap when you're on the receiving end. I want you to describe what you notice when no one's performing." He let out a breath. "And I'd like you to tell us how we treat the people who keep this place running when none of us are here." He didn't say it with shame, and he didn't say it with the polished warmth of a staged apology. He said it like an executive making a strategic correction, because it was one. Culture cost money. Indifference cost more. Darlene stared at her hands. The rag had left a faint damp ring on her palms. She placed it carefully on the edge of the chair. "If you're sure," she said. "I am." "Then, yes." The syllable left her mouth like a stone pushed over a ledge. It fell, and then it flew. A quiet smile moved through his face, not triumphant, but satisfied. "Good." The door opened a few inches, and his assistant stepped in, phone in hand, voice pitched low. "Legal's already scrubbing the contract. We'll circulate a corrected version within the hour." Hawthorne nodded, then glanced at Darlene again. "Hold calls for 10, please." When they were alone once more, he added, "There's one more thing. If anyone gives you grief for last night, they answer to me. You acted in the best interest of this company. Full stop." She didn't realize how much tension she'd been carrying until that sentence released a pressure valve at the base of her neck. "Thank you," she said, and immediately wondered if it was too small a phrase for what the moment called for. But he seemed to understand that gratitude from her didn't come cheap, and he accepted it without fuss. He walked her to the door. The small gesture, the CEO stepping aside, palm extended toward the hallway, felt heavier than all the polished mahogany and glass on the floor. As she stepped out, he said, "My office will send the time. Take the bus home, get some rest. And, Miss Whitaker," she turned, "you were right. People don't like being ignored. I won't make that mistake again." The elevator ride down was oddly quiet. Morning traffic began to hum in the streets. Somewhere between 23 and 1, Darlene felt the shift. Not from cleaner to executive, she didn't kid herself, but from invisible to seen. It didn't make her taller. It made her steadier. On the sidewalk, the cool Detroit air met her cheeks. She pulled her jacket tight and walked to the bus stop, the city waking around her. A baker dragged racks of bread toward a storefront. A woman in scrubs hurried across the street with a coffee balanced in one hand and a lunch bag in the other. Darlene saw them both and felt, for once, seen in return. Not by them, but by the day itself. She made it home just after 8. The apartment smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old wood. On the counter, a stack of envelopes waited, the everyday obligations that never grew lighter just because a CEO said thank you. She set her keys down and pressed her palms to the cool surface of the laminate, as if to ground herself after a night spent high above glass and steel. The adrenaline began to ebb, and the tiredness came on like a tide. Before she lay down, she checked her phone, a modest device with a cracked corner and a plan as lean as her budget. A new message glowed on the screen from a number flagged Hawthorne Global. It was concise. Leadership session, Thursday 3 p.m., Executive Conference A. Attendance confirmed for A. Hawthorne plus ELT. Special guest, D. Whitaker. Night facilities. She read it twice. The words didn't change. She placed the phone face down on the nightstand and let sleep pull her under. When she woke mid-afternoon, sunlight slipped through the blinds in gentle bands. For a few seconds, she didn't remember. Then the memory returned all at once. The ringing phone, the voice from Munich, the CEO's eyes when he said apology and respect in the same breath. She sat up slowly, letting her joints loosen one by one. On the chair near the door hung her uniform, washed and pressed as it always was before a shift. She could do the work in her sleep. She had many nights. But Thursday would require a different kind of preparation. Not a costume, not a makeover, just a choice about how to carry herself in a room that had never been designed for her to speak. She ironed a clean white blouse and a navy cardigan she saved for church and interviews. Nothing flashy. She braided her hair tighter than usual and pinned it at the nape of her neck so she wouldn't fidget with it when nerves came. She wrote a few words on a sticky note and stuck it inside the cardigan where only she would know it was there. Tell the truth. Keep it simple. Don't apologize for existing. The next 2 nights at work, she moved through her routine with the same precision, but the halls felt different. Not lighter, not softer, just honest. She caught herself noticing the way an assistant lowered his voice when another vice president walked past, the way a conference room went silent when a junior analyst asked a good question, the way tension seemed to pool around the word deadline like rain around a clogged drain. These were not new observations. What was new was the knowledge that someone had asked to hear them. Thursday came, as Thursdays do, without fanfare. By 2:30, her shift long ended. Darlene stood outside Executive Conference A. She had taken an earlier bus, then another, to make sure the city's delays couldn't write her out of the story. The corridor air was cool, conditioned to the temperature of expensive decisions. Through the glass, she could see a long table, water bottles aligned like chess pieces, notepads squared to the edge. Several executives had already gathered. Men and women in tailored suits, heads bent over phones, murmuring to one another in half sentences. Board, guidance, risk exposure. Darlene's stomach fluttered. She pressed 2 fingers lightly against the inside of her cardigan where the note rested. The paper was small and warm from her body heat. She didn't take it out. She didn't need to. It was enough to know it was there. The door opened, and Alexander Hawthorne stepped into the hallway. He wasn't flanked by anyone this time. "Miss Whitaker," he said, as if greeting a colleague, "thank you for coming." "Thank you for asking," she answered, and was surprised by how steady she sounded. He lowered his voice, not out of secrecy, but out of respect for the intimacy of nerves. "Here's how this will go. I'll set the frame. I'll explain why you're here, then I'll get out of the way." His mouth tilted. "I don't need you to impress anyone. I need you to be yourself." She nodded. "I can do that." He held the door. She stepped inside, heads turned. Not with ridicule, not with shock, more like curiosity pried open by the boss's presence. Darlene took the seat Hawthorne indicated, not at the far end, not against the wall, but at the table. The same kind of chair she had circled 100 times with the vacuum hummed under her for the first time. Hawthorne remained standing. "Thank you all for making time," he began. "You know about the error we nearly shipped to a partner. You also know we salvaged it." A few people nodded, a tightness in their expressions that said they had spent part of the last 24 hours explaining the near disaster to their own teams. "What you may not know," Hawthorne continued, "is who kept us from losing the deal before dawn." He didn't drag it out. He didn't turn the reveal into theater. He simply turned his open hand toward Darlene. "Miss Darlene Whitaker answered my phone when no one else did. She listened. She de-escalated, and she earned us the time we needed to correct our mistake." He let the sentence breathe. "I invited her here because I want us to hear from the person who sees this place when we aren't looking." He took his seat. "Miss Whitaker, would you share your perspective?" A dozen faces rested on her like placed weights. light at first, but present. She straightened a fraction, feeling the quiet give of the blouse at her shoulders, the press of the cardigan against her ribs, the warmth of the note hidden like a small engine. "Thank you," she said, and her voice carried more easily than she expected in the room built to hold it. "I'm not a lawyer. I'm not an executive." She allowed the truth to settle without apology. "I'm here every night. I clean your rooms, I empty your trash, I hear things in the hallways and elevators, not secrets, just people being real because they think only the walls are listening." A few smiles, not patronizing, but recognizing. "What I've noticed," she continued, "is that it's easy to forget the person on the other end of a contract isn't a problem to be solved. They're a person who doesn't want to feel trapped. I've heard that word, exclusivity, make people proud and make other people angry. The ones who are angry usually just want to be treated like partners, not like they're lucky to be here." She paused, gathering the next thought. "And inside these walls, sometimes the way we talk to each other changes when a tidal walks by. Voices drop, questions die on the way out. I don't think anyone means harm. I just think it's easy to act big and listen small." No one interrupted. No one checked a phone. "I don't have slides," she said, almost smiling. "I only have floors and windows and your words when you forget there's a person nearby. If you want fewer mistakes like the one in that contract, make more room for people to speak up before it gets that far. And if you want partners to trust you, don't make them fight to be heard." Silence spread, not empty, but full, of recognition, of the slight embarrassment that comes when you realize you're not exempt from a simple truth. Hawthorne let the quiet sit long enough for the point to do its work. Then he nodded, slowly, like a man signing a decision in his mind. "Thank you," he said. "That's exactly what we needed to hear." Darlene couldn't yet know how the words would ripple beyond the glass of that room. That belonged to another hour. What she knew, sitting at that table, was simpler and heavier. She had been asked. She had answered. She had been listened to, fully, without the room looking past her to the next agenda item. For the first time since the phone rang in the middle of the night, her hands were still. Word spread quietly at first, then quickly, like ripples moving out from a stone dropped in still water. What had nearly happened with Stephen Klein, and what had actually saved the company, became a story whispered in conference rooms, repeated in hushed tones near coffee machines, carried out of Executive Conference A by people who couldn't quite shake the moment they had witnessed. The cleaning lady saved the deal. It sounded almost like a rumor, too simple to be true. Executives who had sat in the room during the session confirmed it. Vice presidents who had missed it pressed for details. Assistants traded the story like currency. How the woman in the navy cardigan, who usually moved silently down hallways with a cart and mop, had sat at the table and spoken truths no one dared to frame so plainly. For years, Darlene Whitaker had been a shadow in the building. She had vacuumed around feet that didn't move to make way. She had carried trash bins past conversations that cut off mid-sentence as if her presence wasn't worth recalibrating for. She had been part of the background, a fixture without identity. Now she was the subject of conversations in offices where her name had never been spoken before. It wasn't riches or sudden promotions that marked the change. It was recognition. The small things that landed harder than she ever expected. On Monday, as she pushed her cart into the 23rd floor hallway, one of the younger analysts stopped mid-stride, smiled, and said, "Evening, Miss Whitaker." He didn't hurry past. He paused just long enough for her to register the respect in his tone. 2 days later, another executive, someone who had once walked by her dozens of times without acknowledgement, set down his coffee cup and said, "We're glad you spoke up last week. You gave us a lot to think about." His words weren't polished like a slogan. They were plain, almost awkward, but they were real. The first time it happened, Darlene didn't know how to respond. She nodded, muttered something about just doing my job, and kept moving. But the second time she met their eyes and said, "Thank you." The third time, she smiled. The change was subtle but steady. She was no longer invisible. At home, nothing looked different. The bills still sat stacked on the counter. The bus rides were still long, the nights still quiet. Her children called now and then, their voices carrying the rush of lives with jobs and kids of their own. Darlene didn't tell them the full story. She didn't mention billion-dollar contracts or meetings with the CEO. To her, it felt less like something to boast about and more like something to hold privately, like a small flame that didn't need the wind of attention. But inside Hawthorne Global, that flame had grown into something larger. Alexander Hawthorne himself never let the moment pass into rumor. Every time he saw her in the hallway, he nodded with recognition, not perfunctory, not performative. When other executives noticed, they followed his lead. Respect trickled down, not as policy but as example. Darlene continued to work her shifts. She still emptied trash, polished windows, scrubbed marks from glass tables. She didn't expect, nor did she receive, sudden wealth or new titles. What she received was rarer: acknowledgement, trust, and the sense that her presence mattered. On a Friday evening, waiting at the bus stop outside the glittering tower, she looked across the river at the city lights flickering against the dark water. For a moment, she let herself replay the sound of that phone ringing, the moment she had hesitated with her hand hovering over the receiver. How easy it would have been to walk away, to tell herself it wasn't her business, to remain invisible, as the world expected her to. But she hadn't. She had picked up. She had spoken. She had steadied a man across the ocean who was ready to throw everything away. And because she did, she had given her company, her city, and herself a story worth remembering. Sometimes life doesn't send invitations neatly tied with ribbon. Sometimes it comes in the form of a ringing phone in the middle of the night. A moment too small to matter, until it does. Darlene Whitaker knew she would never again be just the woman with the mop. She was the woman who answered the call, who kept her word, who reminded powerful people of something simple and unforgettable. Everyone matters, even the ones you don't see. And now they would not forget her. If this story inspired you, let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and stay tuned for the next story tomorrow.